All set? Okay, I'd like to call the meeting to order. I'm not doing that. I would like to call to order the Oregon City Regular Council meeting for February 10th, 2025. The time is 7:08. And would you please stand and join us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Ms. Rawson, would you please take a roll call of council members present?
Mrs. Ackerman, Mr. Drake,
Here.
Mr. Horniak,
Here.
Mrs. Paula,
Here.
Mr. Reeves,
Here.
Mr. Salander,
Here.
Mr. Wallensack.
Here.
Thank you. Let it be known that 6 of our council people are here tonight. Ms. Ackerman did contact us about not being able to be here. So could I please seek a motion to excuse her from tonight's meeting?
Mr. President,
Yes, Mr. Salander.
I'd like to make a motion to approve, to
Excuse.
excuse Councilwoman Ackerman from tonight's meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Salander. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Wallensack. Thank you very much. Also present at tonight's meeting is Mayor Safarian, City Administrator Joel Mazer, Clerk of Council Cassie Rawson, our Law Director Melissa Papora, our Public Service Director Mr. Paul Roman, Assistant Police Chief Ryan Spangler, Fire Chief Clayton O'Brien, Assistant Fire Chief Mark Mullins, Finance Director Mr. Nick Roman, and Battalion Chief Purdy. The next order of business is to approve the meeting minutes from the January 27th, 2025 regular council meeting and the February 3rd, 2025 committee of the whole meeting. Council members, I seek a motion.
Mr. President,
Yes, Mr. Horniak.
I move to approve the minutes of the January 27th, 2025 regular and the February 3rd, 2025 committee, the whole meeting as presented.
Thank you. Do I have a second?
Second.
Mr. Drake. We have a motion by Mr. Horniak, second by Mr. Drake. Does anyone have any objections? Hearing none, meeting minutes are accepted as presented. First item on the agenda is persons and delegations. We have one person that is signed in for this evening. If you would, please come up to the podium, state your name and address for the record. Mr. Smeedy.
Thank you, Mr. President. Omar Smeedy, 2949 Camelot. Mr. President, I wanted to address Mr. Mazer. Just wanted to revisit one thing about that Senate Bill 56 I asked about last week. One thing that I forgot to ask you was that suppose this bill passes in the state legislation, theoretically, would the city of Oregon be able to revoke or prevent these dispensaries from doing business in the city if you so desire?
Mr. President.
Yes, Mr. Major.
And Mr. Smeedy, so Senate Bill 56 is still being discussed at the state level. My understanding is there have been amendments that have been proposed to this, and instead of increasing it to a 15% excise tax, increasing it to a 20%, but still allowing municipalities to have a say or a portion of that excise tax. So there are some proposed changes right now. Don't know where it's going to settle. A lot of things at the state level happen like this, so it'll take some time for it to develop, and we'll keep everybody apprised of what's going on when these changes do happen. But to answer your question, yes, the council does have the ability to, I guess for lack of a better word, put a moratorium on or reintroduce a new moratorium on dispensaries to wait and see what happens at the state level.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Mr. President, I wanted to address Mr. Roman as well. So Mr. Roman, I just wanted to ask you, I took up a lot of time last week, so I didn't get a chance to fit in my last request towards you. You know, over over the years, I've done a lot of work just out in the field, so to speak, litter mitigation, prevention. I do a lot of that. And so like there was one particular area, the Walmart fields, basically the whole vicinity around Walmart. This is a really bad one, probably one of the worst ones in the whole city, just from the patrons. It gets into the fields. There's a pond there to the east of the Walmart store. Geese, ducks, they reside there. I've even seen a bald eagle in that pond before fishing. It's a big concern to me. I tried reaching out, and the only reason why I'm bringing this up is because I was aware last year there was a Resolution 81, 2024 property maintenance codes. And, granted, there was 207 resolutions last year. I mean, it's hard for someone like me to keep track of all these different resolutions and what happens. But my understanding is that did pass. And so I reached out to the store manager myself, multiple occasions, leaving my phone number. I'm not getting any feedback back from the store manager. I just wanted him, I'm aware that they do try to, pick up that litter. My point is, it's not enough. It's like almost they need a full-time employee just picking up litter. That's how bad it is. I would pick up litter. I'd pick up more than 5 bags a day. Within a day or two, you could get 5 to 6 more bags. That's how bad it is. And that's, it gets everywhere. It's in Fifth Third's property, it's in PJ's lawn. It's everywhere. So I'm just asking if maybe there was some help that the city could do to address that. Granted, I know you guys have a lot more important things, but it is a big concern to me.
Mr. President, Mr. Smeedy, what are you asking? Are you asking for the city to pick up the litter? Are you asking to enforce a law, or what are you asking?
Yes, to basically address the issue with the store manager. His name is Justin. Like I said, he's just dodging me. I think he knows what I want, and he's dodging me because I've left my number multiple times and I'm not getting any response.
And we had and so just to further understand, we did have a committee meeting a week ago about debris getting in stormwater, and garbage and so on. And no, there's no doubt Kmart, same thing. The predominant wind is from the west, and a lot of bags and debris head due east, and they end up in a creek or they end up in a field. And I don't know if I have the answer for you. I think we talked about, is there a litter fine? There is, and obviously an officer would have to witness something like that. I know the building maintenance code is under the building and zoning department. Steve Shrake is in charge of that, and he may say, well, if it's not related to the safety and welfare of the property, that code may not apply to litter. So I think you'd have to go by what's currently in our litter code to go after a property, unless someone filed a nuisance complaint against the property owner for litter, then perhaps they could be held responsible that way. I would have to check with Melissa Papura and Steve Shrake to see if there's language already in the code for that. I think you'd almost have to look at it as a nuisance complaint. Usually a nuisance complaint is saying that an adjacent property, that the use and beneficial, well, the use of their property is affected by one's nuisance of a neighboring property. And usually that's the reason to file a nuisance complaint. People do use the code as a war against each other. We do get that a lot. But I think in this case, I don't know how well a store manager is going to be able to combat it, though.
Mr. Chairman, or Mr. President?
Mr. Wallenczak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I think what Mr. Smeedy is asking for is, can we just reach out and communicate with the store to see if, hey, we've brought on a new property maintenance code. We're going to look to enforce that code a little bit more closely. Can you help combat the litter blowing off your property and pick it up along the snow fence before it gets to the pond on a more timely basis?
I mean,
Yes, please.
Yeah, and that's fair. I guess my mind's just racing ahead to say, when they can't do it or they can't promise anything, how do you react? And that's what I'm saying.
And that's when you tell him that, hey, we have introduced a new property maintenance code. We're going to look to enforce that a little more closely, but we want to work with you to prevent all that litter from blowing up against that snow fence and just make our community look a little bit better.
And that's understood, Mr. Wallenzeck. I just
you.
think, to me, to carry that out may not be as easy, is all I'm saying.
No, it may not be, but at least we should reach out to him.
Yep.
and ask.
Yep, I agree.
Yeah.
Mr. President,
Mr. Drake.
I agree with Mr. Smeedy and Dennis on what he said. I know I deal with a lot of complaints, as I'm sure a lot of you guys do. And I know people that have owned land. It was actually Eagles Landing was the last one I dealt with. And they knew who owned the land, and there was issues with weeds behind and trash behind the guardrail. So I drove out there numerous times and the grass was real tall, whatever. And the person just mentioned to him, hey, is there any way you can get that mowed? You know, there's been a lot of complaints. And boom, the two brothers went out there, they mowed it. And I agree with you, because I'll walk on that sidewalk there at the end of Camelot. And heck, I mean, it looks like Woodstock. I mean, there's trash and junk everywhere. And I agree with Dennis. I think just a knock on the door, or go in and talk to the guy and just say, hey, the manager, you know, is there any way you could clean that up? I mean, it looks terrible.
I certainly appreciate that. And I don't mean to belittle the manager. I mean, he did actually, because I spent dozens of times cleaning up that area last year, actually the past 2 years. And they actually put up that green snow fence along the perimeter of the east side of their parking lot. After I had, because they knew I was out there. They knew it. They never acknowledged me, never approached me, but they knew I was doing it. So they put that green snow fence as a, to help mitigate, but it really did nothing. You'll see this stuff is all up against the fence. And I know they do send an employee out there. I do appreciate that. They do. What I'm saying is they need to do more. That's all. One last thing before I leave, I like the city update about the Columbia Gas work, but I actually liked the post that OPD did because it actually provided a map, a visual, which I thought the city didn't have that visual on their Facebook page, but OPD did a really nice visual that was very clear about how the traffic will route. Thank you.
Thank you. Getting on with our meeting, we need to add item 027 of 2025 to tonight's agenda. Can I seek a motion to add this item to the agenda?
Mr. President,
Yes, Mr. Horniak.
so moved.
Thank you. Do we have a second? Second by Mr. Wallenzeck. Council, are there any objections? Hearing none, item 27 of 2025 has been added to tonight's agenda. We have two public hearings tonight. However, I will present them together, so I will open the public hearing. I think we'll do them separately, and then vote on those. So I will open the public hearing at 7:21 for the first agricultural district renewal application is for William and Donna S. Nelson, trustees for 10 acres located at 5202 Cedar Point Road, 25 acres located at 5252 Cedar Point Road, 38.65 acres located at 7025 Navarre Avenue, and 17.38 acres located at 6825 Seaman Road. Is there anybody in the audience that is here in favor of the agricultural district renewal? Hearing none. Is there anybody here that opposes the agricultural district renewal? I will close the meeting at 7:22. And you read? We're gonna read, okay, I will assign 025 of 2025 as ordinance 025 of 2025 and ask Ms. Rawson to please read it into the record.
Approving inclusion of certain land situated in the city of Oregon, Ohio, owned by William E. and Donna S. Nelson trustees into an agricultural district for a 5-year period and declaring an emergency.
Thank you, Ms. Rawson. Council,
Mr. President,
Mr. Horniak.
I move for passage of ordinance 25 of 2025 as an emergency measure.
Thank you, Mr. Horniak.
Second.
Second by Mr. Wallenczak. Ms. Rawson, would you please take a roll call vote of council?
Mr. Horniak,
Yes.
Mr. Wallenczak.
Yes.
Mrs. Ackerman, Mr. Drake,
Yes.
Mrs. Paula,
yes,
Mr. Reeves,
Yes.
Mr. Salander.
Yes.
Thank you. Ordinance 025 of 2025 does pass with a vote of 6 yeas and to 0 nays. The next public hearing, I will open at 7:24. And the application is for James L. and Christine L. Beeler for 10 acres located at 4745 Seaman Road, 14.741 acres located at 4419 Seaman Road, 18.305 acres located at 237 South Stadium Road, and 19.269 acres located at 350 South Stadium Road. At this time, is there anybody in the audience that is in favor of this? Hearing none, is there anybody that's opposing it? Hearing none, I will close the public hearing at 7:25. And I will assign item 026 of 2025 as ordinance 26 of 2025 and ask Ms. Rawson to please read it into the record.
Approving inclusion of certain land situated in the city of Oregon, Ohio, owned by James L. and Christine L. Beeler into an agricultural district for a 5-year period and declaring an emergency.
Thank you, Ms. Rawson. Council,
Mr. President,
Mr. Horniak.
I move for passage of ordinance 26 of 2025 as an emergency measure.
Thank you, Mr. Horniak.
Second.
Second by Mr. Wallenczak. We have a motion by Mr. Horniak, second by Mr. Wallenczak. Ms. Rawson, would you please take a roll call vote of council?
Mr. Horniak,
Yes.
Mr. Wallenczak,
Yes.
Mr. Drake,
Yes.
Mrs. Paula, Mr. Reeves,
Yes.
Mr. Salander.
Yes.
Thank you. Ordinance 026 of 2025 does pass with a vote of 6 yeas, 0 nays. The next item on the agenda for this evening is item 012 of 2025, and it's presented by our mayor and fire chief, Clayton O'Brien.
Mr. President,
Mr. Mayor.
all these ordinances, except the last one you added, we discussed at the committee of the whole. We have nothing to add. If there's any questions that anybody come up with from last week to this week, we would certainly try to address any of those questions. But we stand pat on all these up till the last one that you added.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Council, any questions on 012 of 2025? Hearing none, I will assign item 012 of 2025 as ordinance 012 of 2025 and ask Ms. Rawson to please read it in the record.
Authorizing the mayor and finance director to issue purchase orders to Atlantic Emergency Solutions, Findlay Regional Service Center, 1120 Lima Avenue, Findlay, Ohio, to provide maintenance and repair services for fire engines and tower ladders and declaring an emergency.
Thank you, Ms. Rawson. Council,
Mr. President,
Ms. Ms. Pauloff.
I move for passage of ordinance 12 of 2025 as an emergency measure.
Thank you, Ms. Pauloff.
Second.
Second by Mr. Salander. We have a motion by Ms. Pauloff, second by Mr. Salander. Any objections? Hearing none, Ms. Rawson, would you please take a roll call vote of council?
Mrs. Paula,
Yes.
Mr. Salander,
Yes.
Mr. Drake,
Yes.
Mr. Horniak,
Yes.
Mr. Reeves.
Yes.
Mr. Wallensack.
Yes.
Thank you. Ordinance 012 of 2025 does pass with a vote of 6 yeas, 0 nays. We'll move on to the next item, and that item is number 013 of 2025. And council, are there, council, any questions? Hearing none, I will assign item 013, 2025 as ordinance 013 of 2025 and ask Ms. Rawson to please read it into the record.
Authorizing the mayor and finance director to issue purchase orders to American Enterprises, Inc., 5508 Navarre Avenue, Oregon, Ohio, to provide maintenance and repair services for the fire department vehicles and declaring an emergency.
Thank you, Ms. Rawson. Council,
Mr. President,
Ms. Paula.
I move for passage of ordinance 13 of 2025 as an emergency measure.
Thank you, Ms. Paula.
Second.
Second by Mr. Salander. We have a motion by Ms. Paula, second by Mr. Salander. Council, any objections? Hearing none, Ms. Rawson, would you please read or take a roll call vote of council?
Mrs. Paula,
Yes.
Mr. Salander,
Yes.
Mr. Drake,
Yes.
Mr. Horniak,
Yes.
Mr. Reeves,
Yes.
Mr. Wallensack.
Yes.
Thank you. Ordinance 013 of 2025 does pass with a vote of 6 yeas to 0 nays. The next item on the agenda is item number 014 of 2025. Council, are there any questions on item 014 of 2025? Hearing none, I will assign item 014 of 2025 as ordinance 014 of 2025 and ask Ms. Rawson to please read it into the record.
Authorizing the mayor and finance director to enter into a 4-year agreement with Zoll Medical Corporation, 269 Mill Road, Chelmsford, Massachusetts, in the amount of $16,794.60 for the purpose of maintenance and repair for Zoll ventilators and declaring an emergency.
Thank you, Ms. Rawson. Council,
Mr. President,
Mrs. Paula.
I move for passage of ordinance 14 of 2025 as an emergency measure.
Thank you, Ms. Paula.
Second.
Second by Mr. Salinger. Thank you. Any objections? Excuse me, hearing none. Ms. Rawson, would you please take a roll call vote of council?
Mrs. Paula,
Yes.
Mr. Salander,
Yes.
Mr. Drake,
Yes.
Mr. Horniak,
Yes.
Mr. Reeves,
Yes.
Mr. Wallensack.
Yes.
Thank you. Ordinance 14 of 2025 does pass with a vote of 6 yeas to 0 nays. The next item on the agenda is item 15 of 2025. Council, are there any questions on item 15 of 2025? Hearing none, I will assign item 15 of 2025 as ordinance 15 of 2025 and ask Ms. Rawson to read it into the record.
Authorizing the mayor and finance director to issue purchase orders to WW Williams, 3325 Libby Road, Perrysburg, Ohio, to provide maintenance and repair services for fire engines and tower ladders and declaring an emergency.
Thank you, Ms. Rawson. Council?
Mr. President,
Yes, Mrs. Paula.
I move for passage of ordinance 15 of 2025 as an emergency measure.
Thank you.
Second.
Second by Mr. Salander. Thank you. We have a motion by Ms. Paula, second by Mr. Salander. Any objections, council? Hearing none, Ms. Rawson, would you please take a roll call vote of council?
Mrs. Paula,
Yes.
Mr. Slander,
Yes.
Mr. Drake,
Yes.
Mr. Horniak,
Yes.
Mr. Reeves,
Yes.
Mr. Wallensack.
Yes.
Thank you. Ordinance 15 of 2025 does pass with a vote of 6 yeas to 0 nays. The next item on the agenda is item number 16 of 2025. Council, are there any questions on item 16 of 2025? Hearing none, I will assign item 16 of 2025 as ordinance 16 of 2025 and ask Ms. Rawson to please read it into the record.
Authorizing the mayor and finance director to issue a purchase order to Lally Chevrolet, 24999 Miles Road, Warrensville, Ohio, for the purpose of purchase of two 2025 Chevrolet Tahoe CK10706 four-wheel drive 1500 special service vehicles per specification to be used by the Oregon Fire Division in an amount of $104,056 and declaring an emergency.
Thank you, Ms. Rawson. Council,
Mr. President,
Ms. Paula.
I move for I move for passage of ordinance 16 of 2025 as an emergency measure.
Thank you, Ms. Paula.
Second.
Second by Mr. Salinger. Thank you. Motion by Ms. Paula, second by Mr. Salinger. Council, any objections? Hearing none. Ms. Rawson, would you please take a roll call vote of council?
Mrs. Paula,
Yes.
Mr. Salinger,
Yes.
Mr. Drake,
Yes.
Mr. Horniak,
Yes.
Mr. Reeves,
Yes.
Mr. Wallenzeck.
Yes.
Thank you. Ordinance 016 of 2025 does pass with a vote of 6 yeas, 0 nays. Next item on the agenda is item 17 of 2025. Council, are there any questions on items 17 of 2025? Hearing none, I will assign item 17 of 2025 as ordinance 17 of 2025 and ask Ms. Rawson to please read it into the record.
Authorizing the mayor and finance director to issue a purchase order to Duck Water Boats, Inc., 3093 Barn Hill Road, SE, New Philadelphia, Ohio, for the purchase of a rescue boat to be used by the fire department in an amount not to exceed $84,630 and declaring an emergency.
Thank you, Ms. Rawson. Council?
Mr. President,
Yes, Mrs. Paula.
I move for passage of ordinance 17 of 2025 as an emergency measure.
Thank you, Ms. Paula.
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Salinger. We have a motion by Ms. Paula, second by Mr. Salinger. Any objections, council? Hearing none. Ms. Rawson, will you please take a roll call vote of council?
Mrs. Paula,
Yes.
Mr. Salinger,
Yes.
Mr. Drake,
Yes.
Mr. Horniak,
Yes.
Mr. Reeves,
Yes.
Mr. Wallenzeck.
Yes.
Thank you. Ordinance 17 of 2025 does pass with a vote of 6 yeas to 0 nays. The next item on the agenda is item number 18 of 2025. Council, are there any questions on item 18 of 2025? Hearing none, I will assign item 18 of 2025 as ordinance 18 of 2025 and ask Ms. Rawson to please read it into the record.
Amending the classification plan of the City of Oregon as approved by Ordinance 69, 2019, as amended by creating the classification of lieutenant within the Oregon Fire and Rescue Department and establishing a pay range for lieutenant and declaring an emergency.
Thank you, Ms. Rawson. Council?
Mr. President,
Yes, Mrs. Paula.
I move for passage of ordinance 18 of 2025 as an emergency measure.
Thank you, Ms. Paula.
Second.
Second by Mr. Salinger. Thank you, Mr. Salinger. Council, any objections? Hearing none. Ms. Rawson, will you please take a roll call vote of council?
Mrs. Paula,
Yes.
Mr. Salinger,
Yes.
Mr. Drake,
Yes.
Mr. Horniak,
Yes.
Mr. Reeves,
Yes.
Mr. Wallenzeck.
Yes.
Thank you. Ordinance 18 of 2025 does pass with a vote of 6 yeas, 0 nays. The next item is item number 19 of 2025. Council, are there any questions on item 19 of 2025? Hearing none, I will sign item 19 of 2025 as ordinance 19 of 2025 and ask Ms. Rawson to please read it into the record.
Authorizing the mayor and finance director to issue a purchase order to Buck and Nobby Equipment Co., Inc., 6220 Stearns Road, Ottawa Lake, Michigan, for the purchase of a new 2024 Yanmar VI 0807 mini hydraulic excavator, $105,900, with new Felling FT 24T 25-foot tilt deck trailer, $29,420.20, to be used by the Water Distribution Division in the Department of Public Service for a total amount not to exceed $135,320.20 and declaring an emergency.
Could you repeat that again, please?
Yeah.
Shirley, that's
I was just gonna
That
ask
was
her if she could
beautiful.
tell us what the Yanmar
Yeah.
hydraulic system was. But thank you, Ms. Rawson. Council,
Mr. President,
Mr. Salinger.
I'd like to make a motion for passage of item 19 of 2025 as an emergency measure.
Thank you, Mr. Salinger.
Second.
Second by Ms. Paula. We have a motion by Mr. Salinger, a second by Ms. Paula. Council, any objections? Hearing none. Ms. Rawson, will you please take a roll call vote of council?
Mr. Salinger,
Yes.
Mrs. Paula,
Yes.
Mr. Drake,
Yes.
Mr. Horniak,
Yes.
Mr. Reeves,
Yes.
Mr. Wallenzeck.
Yes.
Thank you. Ordinance 19 of 2025 does pass with a vote of 6 yeas, 0 nays. The next item on the agenda is item 20 of 2025. Council, are there any questions on item 20 of 2025? Hearing none, I will assign item 20 of 2025 as ordinance 20 of 2025 and ask Ms. Rawson to please read it into the record.
Authorizing the mayor and finance director to issue a purchase order to Bauman Ford Oregon LLC, 2811 Navarre Avenue, Oregon, Ohio, for the purchase of a 2025 Ford F-150 4x4 Super Crew Cab pickup truck to be used in the street division in the Department of Public Service in an amount not to exceed $52,589 and declaring an emergency.
Thank you, Ms. Rawson. Council.
Mr. President,
Yes, Ms. Pauloff.
I move for passage of ordinance 20 of 2025 as an emergency measure.
Thank you, Ms. Pauloff.
Second.
Second by Mr. Drake. We have a motion by Ms. Pauloff, second by Mr. Drake. Council, any objections? Hearing none. Ms. Rawson, would you please take a roll call vote of council?
Mrs. Paula,
Yes.
Mr. Drake,
Yes.
Mr. Horniak,
Yes.
Mr. Reeves,
Yes.
Mr. Salander,
Yes.
Mr. Wallenzack.
Yes.
Thank you. Ordinance 20 of 2025 does pass with a vote of 6 yeas, 0 nays. The next item on the agenda is item 21 of 2025. Council, are there any questions on item 21 of 2025? Hearing none, I will assign item 020, I will assign item 021 of 2025 as ordinance 021 of 2025. And ask Ms. Rawson to please read it into the record.
Authorizing the mayor and finance director to issue a purchase order to Fremont White Truck Sales and Service, Inc., 3108 East State Street, Fremont, Ohio, for the purchase of a 2025 Volvo truck VHD 42F300 day cab, 113.6-inch BVC cab and chassis to be used by the street division in the Department of Public Service in an amount not to exceed $157,644 and declaring an emergency.
Thank you, Ms. Rawson. Council.
Mr. President,
Yes, Ms. Pauloff.
I move for passage of ordinance 21 of 2025 as an emergency measure.
Thank you, Ms. Pauloff.
Second.
Second by Mr. Drake. We have a motion by Ms. Pauloff, second by Mr. Drake. Council, any objections? Hearing none. Ms. Rawson, would you please take a roll call vote of council?
Mrs. Paula,
Yes.
Mr. Drake,
Yes.
Mr. Horniak,
Yes.
Mr. Reeves,
Yes.
Mr. Salander,
Yep.
Mr. Wallenzack.
Yes.
Thank you. Ordinance 21 of 2025 does pass with a vote of 6 yeas to 0 nays. The next item is item 022 of 2025. Council, are there any questions on items 022 of 2025? Hearing none, I will assign item 022 of 2025 as ordinance 022 of 2025 and ask Ms. Rawson to please read it in the record.
Authorizing the mayor and finance director to issue a purchase order to Kaleida Truck Equipment, Inc., 30840 Tracy Road, Wabash, Ohio, for the purchase of one Volvo 11-foot dump body package to be used by the street division in the Department of Public Service in an amount not to exceed $209,500 and declaring an emergency.
Thank you, Ms. Rawson. Council.
Mr. President,
Yes, Mrs. Pauloff.
I move for passage of ordinance 22 of 2025 as an emergency measure.
Thank you, Ms. Pauloff.
Second.
Second by Mr. Drake. We have a motion by Ms. Pauloff, second by Mr. Drake. Council, any objections? Hearing none. Ms. Rawson, will you please take a roll call vote of council?
Mrs. Paula,
Yes.
Mr. Drake,
Yes.
Mr. Horniak,
Yes.
Mr. Reeves,
Yes.
Mr. Salander,
Yes.
Mr. Wallenzack.
Yes.
Thank you. Ordinance 022 of 2025 does pass with a vote of 6 yeas to 0 nays. The next item is item number 023 of 2025. Council, are there any questions on item 023 of 2025? Hearing none, I will assign item 023 of 2025 as ordinance 023 of 2025 and ask Ms. Rawson to please read it into the record.
An ordinance amending the classification plan of the city of Oregon is approved by ordinance 90, 1986 and ordinance 69 of 2019 by updating and amending the training and experience required of the position of administrative clerk and declaring an emergency.
Thank you. Council.
Mr. President,
Yes, Ms. Paula.
I move for passage of ordinance 23 of 2025 as an emergency measure.
Thank you, Ms. Pauloff.
Second.
By Mr. Horniak. Thank you, Mr. Horniak. Council, any objections? Ms. Rawson, would you please take a roll call vote of council?
Mrs. Paula,
Yes.
Mr. Horniak,
Yes.
Mr. Drake,
Yes.
Mr. Reeves,
Yes.
Mr. Salander,
Yes.
Mr. Wallensack.
Yes.
Thank you. Ordinance 023 of 2025 does pass with a vote of 6 yeas and 0 nays. The next item is item numbers 024. Council, are there any questions on item 024? Hearing none, I will assign item 024 of 2025 as ordinance 024 of 2025 and ask Ms. Rawson to please read it into the record.
Authorizing the mayor and finance director to enter into an agreement with the Oregon on the Bay Regional Economic Development Foundation and declaring an emergency.
Thank you. Council.
Mr. President,
Yes, Mr. Horniak.
I move for passage of ordinance 24 of 2025 as an emergency measure.
Thank you, Mr. Horniak. Second by Mr. Wallensack.
Matter.
We have a motion by Mr. Horniak, second by Mr. Wallensack. Council, any objections? Hearing none, Ms. Rawson, would you please take a roll call vote of council?
Mr. Horniak,
Yes.
Mr. Wallensack.
Yes.
Mr. Drake,
Yes.
Mrs. Paula,
Yes.
Mr. Reeves,
Yes.
Mr. Salander.
Yes.
Thank you. Ordinance 024 of 2025 does pass with a vote of 6 yeas, 0 nays. The next item on the agenda is item 25. I'm sorry. 27. Excuse me.
Our public hearings were the 25 and 26.
Oh, okay. Okay, thank you. The next and final item on the agenda for consideration and passage is item number 027 of 2025, presented by Mayor Safarian and our Public Service Director, Mr. Paul Roman. We'll go right to Mr. Roman.
Thank you, Mr. President. This ordinance is needed to acquire a temporary easement and a right-of-way take for the Navarre Avenue safety improvement. The right-of-way agreement is with the property owners of Sonic. The easement description and the warranty deed take are included in Exhibit A, along with the respective costs. Again, happy to answer any questions on this. I did want to note that we still need right-of-way from 2 property owners for this project, and we do have to certify right-of-way by the first week of April. So we're hoping to come to some agreement with these 2 other property owners, but we may still proceed with the eminent domain process, which starts with a resolution, and then that follows with another ordinance after that. So we've let the property owners know that we're planning to do this, even though we're still negotiating. But I wanted you guys to be aware of it and that you could expect that resolution here in the next week or so. That's it. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Roman. Council. Hearing no questions, I will assign item 027 of 2025 as ordinance 27 of 2025 and ask Ms. Rawson to read it into the record.
Authorizing the mayor, finance director, and director of public service to enter into agreement with SRI Operating Company 3 Glen Lake Parkway, NE, Atlanta, Georgia, for the acquisition of a temporary easement and a portion of property for the LUC SR 2-21.72 Navarre Avenue Safety PID 118234 project and declaring an emergency.
Thank you, Ms. Rawson. Council.
Mr. President,
Yes, Mr. Horniak.
I move for passage of ordinance 27 of 2025 as an emergency measure.
Thank you, Mr. Horniak.
Second.
Second by Ms. Pauloff. We have a motion by Mr. Horniak, second by Ms. Pauloff. Council, any objections? Hearing none. Ms. Rawson, will you please take a roll call vote of council?
Mr. Horniak,
Yes.
Mrs. Paula,
Yes.
Mr. Drake,
Yes.
Mr. Reeves,
Yes.
Mr. Salander,
Yes.
Mr. Wallensack.
Yes.
Thank you. Ordinance 027 of 2025 does pass with a vote of 6 yeas and 0 nays. Having considered all items on the agenda this evening, we will now move into the mayor's report. Mayor?
Thank you, Mr. President. And I've received correspondence, which you received from several different departments on appointments and a couple retirement resignations. I will start with the first one, and that is to accept the retirement resignation of Tim Wall, and it would be effective March 31st, 2025. And I'd ask council's concurrence in accepting the retirement resignation from Mr. Tim Walls from our wastewater treatment plant.
Thank you. Council.
Mr. President,
Yes, Mrs. Paulo.
I move to concur with the mayor's acceptance of the retirement of Tim Walls from the fire department effective, is that March 31st or March 1st? Oh, the water, is that water department? Oh, I'm sorry, from the water department.
Wastewater.
Okay, thank you, from the wastewater department, and that is March 31st of 2025.
Thank you, Ms. Paulo. Do we have a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Salander. Mayor, council concurs.
Thank you. And next, from the Division of Fire, to accept the resignation of Glenn Bates effective February 15th, 2025. And as you see, Glenn has retained a job at the city of Toledo's fire department. That's where he moved on. So we would like to honor the wishes of Glenn Bates and wish him well in Toledo, and ask council's concurrence in the acceptance of his resignation February 15th, 2025.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Council.
Mr. President,
Yes, Mrs. Paulo.
I move to concur with the mayor's acceptance of the resignation of Glenn Bates from the fire department effective February 15th, 2025.
Thank you, Ms. Paulo.
Second.
Second by Mr. Salander. Mayor, council concurs.
Thank you. And now on to fill some vacancies in the fire department, we'll start with asking council's concurrence in the appointment of Abigail Zunk of 4052 Suter Avenue, Toledo, Ohio 43611. And Zunk will be paid an hourly rate of $27.5165 an hour, which is 29. You guys cross me up with this because there's different pays for different shifts, or 29.7480 cents for other hours. The first was for shift work. I could use them.
Okay.
And this appointment will be for part-time firefighter 2 paramedic, and the startup date will be February 10th, 2025. And I'd ask once again council's concurrence in the appointment of Abigail Zunk.
Thank you, Mayor. Council.
Mr. President,
Yes, Mrs. Paulo.
I move to concur with the mayor's appointment of Abigail Zunk as a part-time firefighter 2 paramedic in the fire department, and starting on February 11th, 2025.
Thank you, Ms. Paulo.
Second.
Council.
Thank you. That was what I was gonna, the date. I had said the 10th. Let's see that. So, thank you. Second. Sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Salander. Mayor, council concurs.
Okay, and next, I'll try to stumble through this one a little better and ask council's concurrence in the appointment of Tyler Orms to the position of firefighter 2 EMT. He is presiding at 4240 Herman Place, Toledo, Ohio 43623, and his hourly rate for shift work is $22.6693. And all other work is $29.7480. And his appointment will be effective also February 10th, 2025. And I'd ask council's concurrence, the appointment, Tyler
Yeah.
Orms.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Council. Kathy,
Mr.
Can I
President,
help you? All you have to do is say, move to concur.
I move to concur.
thank you, Ms. Paulo.
No, we were a little confused on the date because you had
Yeah.
said February 10th they start, but that's at this meeting. She starts tomorrow.
Oh,
Correct?
did I say it wrong?
Yes.
Yeah, it's the 11th. I'm sorry.
Do you need these?
I do.
Second.
Which one says tomorrow?
Both of them.
Both of them, yeah.
I don't see that.
Right on.
Oh, February 11th.
February.
Well, we concur.
Yeah.
We're
second.
concurring.
Thank you, Ms. Paulo,
Second.
I'll bring them. glasses.
Mr.
I'm in
Salander?
Denial of them.
Second.
Yeah.
Mayor, council concurs.
I see it now. Okay, I'm done making appointments. That's enough for today.
That's enough appointments for today.
Well, we'll do one more. I know.
Hopefully you got one more.
He does have.
I got one more.
Okay, and still from the
He's
fire
got this one.
department, and I'll get this one right, third time's a charm. I'd ask council concurrence in the appointment of Joel Fry, 16/325 CRP1, Napoleon, Ohio, 43545 to the position of firefighter 2 paramedic. And Mr. Fry's hourly rate for shift work is $27.5165 and all other work $29.7480. And the appointment will be effective tomorrow, Tuesday, February 11th, 2025.
Thank you,
One
Mr.
out
Mayor.
of three ain't bad.
Council,
Mr. President,
thank you, Ms. Paula.
I move to concur with the mayor's appointment of Joel Fry effective Tuesday, February 11th,
Thank you, Ms. Paula.
2025.
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Salander. Mayor, council concurs.
Now, we'll go to the Department of Parks and Recreation and ask council's concurrence to the appointment of Jordan Shanks, Facility Supervisor, Classification 4, Step 5, to Concession Supervisor, Classification 7, Step 1. I guess that's a raise. Would that be right? Yeah, so at Jordan, at Step 1, $22.50 an hour, and it will be effective today. And the council's concurrence, once again, to the promotion to Jordan Shanks.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Mr. President,
Yes, Mr. Drake.
I concur with the mayor on Mr. Shanks.
Thank you.
Second.
Second, thank you, Mr. Horniak. Mayor, council concurs.
Now we're done. Just kidding. No, now lastly, I'm going to ask council concurrence in the appointment of Mr. Anthony Hamilton of 2720 Bleecker Street, Oregon, Ohio, 43616, to the position of maintenance worker in the Division of Streets, Step 1, ASME pay range, hourly rate of $30.44 an hour, annual rate $63,315.20, and the startup date would be February 24th, 2025. And once again, ask council's concurrence in the appointment of Anthony Hamilton, street maintenance worker.
Thank you, Mayor.
Mr. President,
Yes, Mr. Drake.
I concur with the mayor on Mr. Hamilton's appointment in the street department.
Thank you, Mr. Drake.
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Horniak. Mayor, council concurs.
Thank you, council, and I believe Mr. Hamilton's here. You're required to speak for about 15, 20 minutes to. I had to stumble through this on my glasses. You gotta, no, you don't have to say anything, but you could just stand up, let people know and say hi.
Thank you.
Welcome aboard.
Thank you. Mr. Major,
We'll try to bring my glasses.
the tough act to follow.
No report, Mr. President. What's that?
Thank you,
Is that
Mr.
right?
Ms. Purpura.
No report, Mr. President.
Thank you, Ms. Purpura. Mr. Roman.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just wanted to remind everybody that we are planning an eastbound lane closure on the Devar Avenue Bridge over I-280, starting this Wednesday. That'll be for 6 weeks. And that is to allow Columbia Gas to make a repair to their line at the corner of Wheeling and Devar. I've noticed some comments on Facebook ask, hey, can you still get to the local businesses? Yes, you can. You can still take Munding will be open. You can make a right onto Navarre from Munding, or you can take Wheeling to Navarre, go west and use the U-turn. So we're really just doing this to help divert traffic and not cause a large backup, because it'll be restricted to one lane, you know, right at Wheeling, right at the repair. So I just want you guys to know that and remind people. That's it. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Roman. Mr. Horniak.
Just a brief update from my standing committee. We had had some discussion with the Economic Development Foundation over the last couple of weeks. And have, talking with them, they are in the process of interviewing and searching for a new director, and hopefully they'll be able to announce that prior to their meeting coming up here next Friday. From the other side of it, just want to reach out to Mr. Henninger and the crews from Roads. Obviously, we had some ice, some snow, some sleet going on over the weekend, and Wednesday looks like we're going to have another round of it. And I just want to tell you, we really appreciate your folks out on the road doing what they do. And just a reminder to the citizens or whoever may hear it, give right away to that. I see a lot of people tailgating snow plows and coming close to them. Give them the space to do their job when they're out there. Treat it like any other emergency vehicle. It's for their safety and for your own. But I saw someone who needed a little reminder in that over the past weekend, but I just want to say thank you. They did a great job. And that's all I have, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Horniak. Ms. Pauloff.
Thank you, Mr. President. Nothing for my standing committee, but I'm going to piggyback on Mr. Horniak's comments. Thank you for all the information that you have given also to Mr. Henninger. It could have been more snow. You know, I know that if there's ice or snow, just know that the plows are out. The plows are out. So thank you for last weekend, and thanks to the streets department for the great job that they did do. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Pauloff. Mr. Walmsley.
Thank you, Mr. President. I do not have anything for my standing committee, but I do have a couple questions. Earlier today, Omar spoke about Senate Bill 56 and potential changes, and Mr. Mazur mentioned about a moratorium. Should we look at instituting that moratorium now? Because if somebody applies to have an operation in the city of Oregon, we cannot then go back and take that away from them if it's granted. So should we act to put a moratorium in so somebody and start having those discussions? Because if they do not allow the local governments to receive some of those funds, I got a sense that council was looking at reversing our decision. So should we put a moratorium in just in case, so that we don't get preempted by somebody applying for a license in the city of Oregon and being granted, and therefore then we would not be able to take that away from them?
Mr. President, Mr. Wallenczak, I would agree with that. We actually have something drafted, so if it's council's desire, we could bring it back to the next committee of the whole for consideration.
Yeah, and you'd have to get a sense of other council members if they, it doesn't have to be on the floor of council today, but at some point reach out to other council members to see if they so desire.
We'll bring it forward and then you can decide whether to add it to the agenda.
All right, and then Mr. President, I do have another item. At the end of Isaac Street's Drive and Monday, the fence going down to I-280 is down. Back by Orchard Villa and where the recycling is. Who is responsible for maintaining that fence? Because it is down and somebody could walk right down onto I-280, that fence is down.
Mr. President.
Mr. Roman.
Mr. Wall, it would be ODOT's fence, but we probably need to reach out to them and notify them, so.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you as
President.
well. Yeah, Mr. Roman, I know it's been down for a couple of weeks. It looks like there was a pretty good accident that somebody must have come up the off ramp, but thank you. Mr. Salander.
Thank you, Mr. President. Nothing from my standing committee. I'm just going to piggyback off the piggyback on the streets department. Get very much appreciated. I know it's hard to keep up when stuff is coming down like that. I know I was out with I think it's zone 5. I don't know if I'm right on that, but out by Synovus and so forth with Jason, and we were out there for 3 hours. It took us 3 hours just to cover the one zone. So it does take some time. So we just need patience and empathy for those guys out there doing that. So it is very much appreciated. I know they're going to have a long weekend again. So thank you very much for that. And just lastly, just a reminder for those of us, don't forget Friday is Valentine's Day. So don't forget to make sure you get your sweetie something. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Sandler. Mr. Drake.
Yeah, from my Committee of Drainage, Roads and Buildings and Lands, we talked about the public right-of-ways being mowed, whether it be in town or the majority is out east. It sounds like there's a consensus of either having another meeting, hopefully in the near future. Some say 6, some say 8, so maybe 7 might be the number to go with. But just to touch a little bit on what Mr. Horniak said, you know, I get a lot of calls, and I'm sure most of you guys do too, about the subdivisions not being plowed and salted and this and that. So that was a while ago. So I kept track of the people who called me. Most of them I know. And they were complaining, and, you know, their road was no better or worse than my road. And right after we had the ice storm, I drove by the houses to see if they salt their sidewalks. And Mr. Schrake's not here. I don't know if there's an ordinance where you're supposed to salt the sidewalks. Because I know I had the honor Saturday to go out to the shed to feed my squirrels. And I didn't realize there was frozen water under the powdered snow. And I landed on this side, and I have never fell on ice before, but it is not a pleasant thing. So either way, I know Star Avenue, I look, you know, between the bakery there and Circle K, and I mean, it was just a glaze of ice. And how the heck, a lot of people use that along with Navarre. But how people can walk, people in wheelchairs, handicap, whatever. So I don't know if there's how to enforce that. I know it's like enforcing anything else, but it's just dangerous.
Mr. President.
Yes,
And
Mr.
Mr. Drake, yeah, there is an ordinance, and property owners are to keep their sidewalks free and clear of snow and ice when they can now. Of course, there's administrative leeway in that too, because sometimes when it's icy conditions and it's too cold, you know, as you know, the salt doesn't work. So, you know, as long as they're trying and, you know, they're doing their best, we give some people latitude and we don't enforce it. We're not heavy-handed, I should say, but we do enforce on the sidewalks when need be.
Okay, thank you. That's it, Mr. Reed.
Thank you, Mr. Drake. I have nothing from my standing committee, but last week, Mr. Smeedy requested an easy way to message the city on our website. We did add a link to the top of the website to allow residents to message us with questions or comments. So thank you, Mr. Smeedy, for making that suggestion. Thank you. With that being, there is no further business before council. I seek a motion to adjourn. Thank you, Mr. Horniak.
Second.
Second by Mr. Drake. The meeting is adjourned.